No conversation with Larry and Sergey about any topic was ever easy. We argued endlessly about every single thing. We think very much in terms of what is the deployment lifecycle? What does value creation mean? What does Snowflake bring to the table that anyone else cannot? I think every company needs to look really hard at what their enduring value is.
You clearly like putting yourselves into a position where you might fail.
Or succeed.
So yes. At SPC, we really focus on the -1 to 0 part of the journey. And what that really means is our mission is to basically work with really talented people and to give them some time and space to go figure out, ideas worth tackling, quests worth kind of embarking on. One of the reasons why your trajectory is so impressive, Sridhar, is that you've kind of brought yourself back to -1 in your career a few times. You were already having a successful kind of, I would say, trajectory in enterprise software when you kind of joined Google. And then you kind of went back to being an IC at Google. And then, we'll get into it, but I'm curious, the question here is, how have you picked what to work on? Like, you have a good track record of picking good things. So what are some rubrics that you think about, there are things worth tackling?
Yeah, I have a bit more of a nuanced thinking, at least, about how and when to drive change.
Please.
I think change, first of all, is good. Resetting is good. But you also have to internalize that it's pretty brutal to start over from nothing. This started pretty early. I tried to get into IITs, which are one of the elite institutions in India. I failed miserably the first time. And much to my dad's disgust, decided to spend the next year just studying for the exam. He's like, "You're stupid. You should just go to college." But that was a worthwhile bet to take. And then similarly, I concluded, sadly, after 10 years, that research was not something that I was very good at. And I reset that and said, okay, I'll try and be a software engineer. But I had enough of a software engineering background. So I think finding these moments in time to make these changes is important. But most of all, having a sense for what creates value in this space that you're playing in, ideally combined with what are strengths that you bring to the table while you're making this change. That's the balance that I would strive. As an example of a change that in retrospect, I think was a bad change. I think going from Google, running a very large team, very large business, to starting a company, looking in retrospect, wasn't exactly a great change, because many of the things that made me an effective exec at Google, being able to run a pretty complicated business or a big team, building teams, motivating teams, setting product strategy, most of it didn't count for anything once I started Neeva. It's a consumer company. It's all about product market fit. And that's a very chance occurrence. I felt very helpless when I was at Neeva. And that was more of an example of a change where there was just too much risk packed into it. While on the other hand, the change from Neeva to Snowflake, or honestly, being an SVP at Snowflake to being the CEO, these were challenges. These were much easier changes to make because I brought in a set of capabilities that were super helpful, even though it was still a new position.
So there are two things to take away. I mean, there are many things to take away from what you said, but here are two that I'll highlight. So the first one is, you clearly like putting yourselves into a position where you might fail, right? Where you're kind of like, okay, I didn't get into IIT.
Or succeed.
Or succeed. So yes. High upside, potential upside, right? Do you feel like you need to feel that thrill of like potential, like you kind of, I think that deep, I mean, certainly I as a founder, I also like doing stupid adventure sports. And I do wonder if deep down there is a desire to kind of like, I want to put myself onto that edge of my capability to see what I can achieve.
I love challenges. I think you find out more about yourself. I think failures are actually more interesting. Where I tell myself, like, you aren't your failures. You aren't your successes either. And so that aspect of striving, that's not for everyone, but I think it's very human and really important.
Before we move on to Neeva, I'm curious, you spent a long time at Google through what an incredible kind of run, not just at Google, but kind of working on products that I think most of us probably use on a daily basis, search and ads, right? Both of those being kind of like, discrete products. What do you think the founders in this room could learn from what you learned at Google about today's time and age, like building in the age of AI today? Are there things that you took away from your time at Google, either in terms of company culture, how to build, what to build, how to prioritize, that are particularly relevant today?
I mean, all of you, I think, intuitively understand this. The true superpower of great founders, this could be an Elon, definitely Larry and Sergey, is their incredible reductive ability, is that ability to remove all superficial detail and get to the heart of problems, and to arrive at it with relentless discourse. No conversation with Larry and Sergey about any topic was ever easy. They argued endlessly. The IITs were the same way. We argued endlessly about every single thing, important or unimportant. But out of all of that was that desire to push for, like, what are the things that truly matter in a particular situation. The other side of Larry, Sergey, and Eric, who was the CEO for much of my time at Google, was they did this while still being really good human beings. I tell people repeatedly that the three of them have never yelled at me, even though I've given them an endless number of opportunities. I would just go there and argue with them about everything. And we would just go at it for hours and hours. They took these as intellectual challenges. I've never seen them be disrespectful to anyone. I've never seen them scream at anyone. I think to both be good human beings, relentless competitors, make no mistake. We put lots of companies out of business, but it was still fair competition. And they were really good to the people around them. To me, that combination of relentless drive combined with the humanity, that's like defining both for those three and for Google as a company. And some of this you only realize and learn after you've left and you're able to look at yourself there or look at a company with an outside-in view. I think it's a truly remarkable place.
Yeah, I really like that phrasing of having extreme reductive power, because it's interesting when you listen to interviews with Elon. A lot of the common refrain people have is like, oh, he just keeps on fucking talking about the laws of physics. But ultimately, the reason I think he does that a lot is because he has reduced kind of the problem down to where is the actual, what are the things that matter? Where are the places I can change something versus not? And I think that simplified, almost Zen-like view at the end of it is a result of a lot of kind of reductive power over the intervening kind of years. Yeah.
I mean, for the things that he deals with, those are the immovables. I'm sure if you got Elon to do physics research, he'd be arguing about string theory and what's the immovable of physics. It's a way of thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting. Some of the kind of at least at SPC, when we're talking to potential founders, probably some of the most determinative kind of characteristics are just what we call internally clarity, which is that for a given problem, are they able to essentially they can spend 30 minutes kind of walking you through all of the the logic and the detail. But if you just ask them ultimately what are the one or two things that matter for your business in the next 6 months and the next 18 months, they often have very short, succinct answers, which is this is just kind of the one or two things that matter. If this happens, then I think we have a shot to kind of take it to the next level. If it doesn't, we're kind of we'll have to zig and zag, but that's a pretty bad sign, right? Then they have a lot of clarity. And in some ways, it's almost not emotionless, but they're very passionate about it, but they also just have clarity. These are the two things. I wake up and I think about it, and this is what I'm trying to do, especially in the early days. To use this framing, and you already talked about Neeva a little bit, You left Google after 15 years to go. What are the one or two things that were going through your head to kind of like that you wanted to tackle with Neeva? Because part of where I'm going with this, Sridhar, is it that you had the right idea, but perhaps 1 year too early, 2 years too early? Or that's actually a hard way of thinking about the world, kind of like to kind of play the counterfactual back. Yeah.
I mean, to be brutally honest, I think that first of all, the idea was born abstractly that an ad-supported search model had reached sort of its useful limits. And there's nothing wrong with that conclusion. If you're not bound by ads, like obviously you can do a better job. I think the real sin of Neeva and my own arrogance in it was a lack of a clear roadmap on, okay, how? Like what must happen for there to be a much better search engine? It's not something that I should have figured out by building. It's too big a thing to build if you can't conceptualize in the first place. It took the arrival of GPT-3 nearly 3 years later for us to realize, I want to click on a link, said no one. And so that's like the brilliant insight for what can AI powered by a search engine do, because you've removed the click. You give the person what they are looking for in one shot. I think the lack of that clarity, there's a lot of detail about how, and sometimes you can draft onto a wave that comes that you are not quite expecting. That's all the, it's better to be lucky kind of story. But the fundamental sin of Neeva was that lack of clarity for, okay, new search engine, but how?
Arguably, the people who built GPT 3.5 and ChatGPT didn't really know what they had, right? Until it kind of came out and we started using it and everyone's like, oh, this is actually the right way to kind of do everything from like internet search to commerce and so on. So sometimes you also luck, but also just serendipity. Just kind of get the stuff out there,
100%.
And then you see it takes on a life of its own, Yeah.
I'm not, first of all, serendipity, absolutely. But execution still matters.
Sure.
If you go back and look at early 2023, how many people here remember the "we will make Google dance" speech?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. This is from Satya, right?
This is from Satya.
Yeah.
The opportunity was there for the taking. I'm sure most of you don't remember Sydney. But Sydney was way better than ChatGPT. ChatGPT would like spew out trash through much of 2023 anytime you asked a factual question. If you ask for a haiku, it'll do a great job. If you ask for a fact, it'll just like happily make it up. Sydney, Bing's chatbot, had solved all of this. It had this fatal flaw that every interaction with it would take 2 minutes. They never fixed it. These are the people that are supplying capacity to OpenAI. They didn't see the opportunity. Bing itself makes $10+ billion. So they had a lot to lose by pushing on Sydney as the definitive search experience. But these are the people that actually created a much better search, not OpenAI. And they still blew it. So
it's hard building new products. It's really hard. Before we kind of get into Snowflake a little bit, let's talk. I mean, I'm curious to get your take right now. Is this kind of an interesting time to be an open source kind of like model right now? We obviously had GLM 5.2 come out, which is getting rave reviews. And in general, it feels as though that, yes, GPT 5.5 is exciting. Fable, whatever it is, if I could use it, sounds pretty cool.
There's a line of thinking, by the way, that says that all model progress is just dependent on underlying hardware. And Fable and 5.6 are merely B200 models.
Yeah, I know. So I guess my question coming to you is what is your current take on the model ecosystem? Kind of like the leading lab providers, obviously Gemini, ChatGPT, and Claude, and then also obviously the 6 or 7 kind of big open source models. Like, how do you think about navigating in that world from your current position as the CEO of Snowflake?
The Snowflake CEO, I mean, first of all, these have been recurring cycles of the frontier model labs creating models that are significantly better along some variety of dimensions. and then open source models
Catching up. Yep.
catching up. I think, by the way, what is remarkable is that there's just a small handful of companies that can truly create frontier models. Still blows my mind.
Still kind of crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm kind of like, what? Money can't buy stuff? No, it can't. I still find that just wild. I think definitely what is happening with the power of the frontier labs is that, at least with lots of enterprise customers, there's a little bit of a worry of like, wait, all of software, and you see, like Satya had both a tweet and I think an article, Wall Street Journal, on this, where if you look at a world in which kind of all software disappears and these models are the interface between pretty much all of humanity and data underneath, let's say, it's a very different kind of world.
Correct.
So there's an amount of trepidation about being too reliant on a single model source.
Right. But you're really kind of intrinsically a trepidation about centralization.
100%.
Yeah.
And so one of Snowflake's strengths has always been that we were the neutral data player when it came to the CSPs. There are tons of customers that will run their primary on AWS and run a disaster instance on Azure. And part of our selling prop has been your implementations are easily portable from AWS to Azure. In ways, by the way, all of you know this, you can't actually move software that way. This whole thing of cloud computing, blah, blah, in practice is just miserably hard to move any modest sized deployment from one CSP to another. There's just a whole lot of hooks that are super CSP dependent that most companies routinely fall trapped. And so part of our setup now when it comes to AI is that with both our kind of like our sort of Snowflake orchestrator, which is Coco, the coding agent for Snowflake, as well as what we think will be the work front end called Cowork, we are now able to say things like, well, you use it. We will make sure that they work just as well on both OpenAI and on Anthropic. And that's a selling proposition. Mm-hmm. And the open source models in many ways reinforce that because we have a team that's working on running our harnesses on top of the open source models. We have a very good inference team. We can run those models directly ourselves. Very different economics for us as Snowflake, the company. So this is a pretty good setup overall. Mm-hmm. We can also do things like cost optimizations. One of our engineers came up with a very clever compilation technique for skills, which is almost deja vu all over again, which is you had code, and then you had models, and then you had English describing what to do, and then you go back to code for the most simple things that you're doing. But it's very cheap.
It's like, wouldn't it be nice if all of these skills were actually, converted into like simple code that you could then kind of like, have like essentially bytecode that can run much more efficiently, that a compiler could then essentially optimize.
100%. Yeah, 100%. And so you see this cycle coming back. And so in that sense, it's actually pretty good news for companies like Snowflake. But it also, again, I think there are many like fundamental lessons that will continue to be true. The harness is the new browser, regardless of what anyone tells you. Being like buried under someone else's harness, some of us might have to do it. It carries a bunch of risk. And so we have consistently believed, this is partly my consumer background. I have my co-founder who also worked in a consumer background. So we place a lot of value on create products that directly touch the end users. And so that comes in very handy in moments like this.
If I can push you a little bit here to make a forward-looking kind of prognostication about how do you think that the model ecosystem evolves over the next 12 to 24 months? Do you think that, or maybe even the next few years, do you think that there is enough of a concentration of capital / chips / maybe research talent at the best 3 or 4 organizations, again, OpenAI, Anthropic, Google, maybe Meta, such that they will reliably have a 6 to 12 month lead? Or do you think that the gap between open source and closed actually starts to narrow? I don't actually have a point of view on this myself. I think it comes in cycles, you're right, that you kind of get a big closed model release and then open source kind of chips away and then you kind of get a big... So, and we'll see how Fable does, obviously. I think it's a little hard to say. So it's hard to know how big a jump Fable is right now. Yeah.
You either make a lot of predictions or you make none. So I think it's just hard to tell. I think what's been unique about like both chips and AI models, has been the infinite demand for all kinds of different chips and for all kinds of different models. I think it's pretty unique to have a lot of jobs to be run on top of 8-10 chips. Like, they're perfectly good. We used them 6 years ago at Neeva, 5 years ago at Neeva. They're still super useful today to the latest B200s.
And I think the price per compute hour has actually gone up relative to because there's enough kind of demand for it.
This will just continue to evolve, but I think what feels hard right now is the ability for frontier models to truly have like a big gap. The fact that there are 2 of them, first of all, or more potentially, plus a bunch of basically open source labs that are able to catch up relatively quickly. I think that's the most interesting phenomenon. And honestly, again, that is good for all of us because it means that there's not concentration. All of us talk a big game about things like open source, while quite forgetting that Google effectively put an end to all search research. What fool academic wanted to work on search if you couldn't get your hands on 1,000th of the data that the biggest practical product that was being used by everyone on the planet had? Similarly, it's not exactly like the algorithms that powered social networks were a big source of open source, even though Meta itself was a big source of open source for lots of other things. And so I think we could easily have gone down into a world in which one of the model providers was the only model provider. I personally think that we are all damn lucky that it's going to be 3, 5, or 7 companies.
Yeah, that's a good observation. I mean, obviously, as somebody who was at Facebook pretty early, and I think there were 3 of us who actually released Facebook's first open source package, but it was all infrastructure. It was basically an RPC layer thing. But you're totally right that the more broad category of essentially how do you do basically content ranking and like there was a lot of research on it in the early 2000s, and then everybody stopped because if you can't get access to the newsfeed data, then what are you doing? There's no point. Right? Netflix did its Netflix challenge for a while, and then they made it closed source, so nobody wanted to do anything. This is totally, so I think it's actually just really good for us as users that all these open source models exist. And certainly for me, I'm running my personal agents, and I think it was just like a week ago, I don't know, I just out of nowhere, my Hermes agent decided that it was going to take up $600 of Opus 4.8. I'm like, $600 a day, that's a little expensive for even a really good assistant. Then it's pretty easy. You swap in kind of like a cheap open source model and you let it run and you see if you're happy with the results. And it's like, oh, actually, I can't tell the difference. And it was fantastic. Switching gears into perhaps Snowflake, Sridhar, like I'm curious, Snowflake, I think technically was the world's ever biggest software IPO. That's correct, right? If I remember correctly, that's right. It was at IPO.
In terms of dollars raised.
Yeah, it was like the world's biggest ever software IPO. And, historically, I think you kind of made this point earlier, Snowflake is in the business of kind of writing really complex software and then essentially selling it and deploying it, essentially, right? But we also live in an age where software is a lot easier to kind of create, to produce, and so far, we talk a lot about software that, we might vibe code. Maybe it's websites, maybe it's apps, maybe it's internal tools, maybe it's dashboards. Maybe now it's like V1 of like, my startup idea. But we also have people who are now starting to build file systems. We have a couple of people in our portfolio who are like, actually, we're 5 of us. Traditionally, a file system is pretty complex. But you know what? We can write a file system because, we can kind of do it a lot. So at which, kind of the logical question here is that there's probably somebody out there who is, along with the help of kind of these coding agents, building a modern kind of analytics, kind of like storage and database solution. How do you think about that? Yeah.
There's absolutely someone out there building an analytics solution, building, there's actually Postgres. It's already open source. There's lots of stuff that people are building on top of it. There are also people building CRM systems and every other kind of software that there is. I think every company needs to look really hard at what their enduring value is. It used to be that getting enterprises to adopt your software, to getting your software embedded in how they operated day to day, that familiarity was enough of a moat. that they could not, that companies would not think of switching very quickly. I think all of that is changing. So we definitely think a lot about what that enduring value is. A big part of it is getting people to get value from their investments in something like a data platform be a whole lot faster. What do we know about usage? I look at Coco as a key strategic enabler for the future, not because it can get people to implement stuff on Snowflake fast, but it can learn what a particular company needs to do in order to get the jobs that they want done on Snowflake fast. It has the beginnings of a feedback loop for what does it mean to optimize for a particular customer. I was talking to folks, for example, this is not even a wild theory anymore, but I think all software can be reduced to a handful of skills on a data substrate. And these skills can be self-evolving. We have done this for a bunch of our own internal systems. We rebuilt an SRE system from scratch. It was basically Snowflake data. Day 0, there was nothing. At the end of week 1, there were like 24 skills. At the end of week 2, there were more skills than I could reasonably parse and understand what was going on. And the structure has kept evolving for the last 3 months. And it's a full-on system at this point. And so we think very much in terms of what is the deployment lifecycle? What does value creation mean? What does Snowflake bring to the table in a way that like anyone else cannot? And so my take is that we need to be faster to value than, say, a Cloud Code or a Codex plus some open source systems. That's the kind of competition that we're going to be facing. But the ideas are very much that of think in terms of durable value, think in terms of how does usage of the product make future usage go much faster. I think like ironically, ad systems are secure in the world of AI because they involve a feedback loop that's largely invisible to the outside world. So all of us need to be thinking in terms of what stays if all software can be easily replicated.
It's a good answer, actually. I mean, to kind of you're right. Code can be very easily generated, but historically, time to value in an enterprise software has been long. Like, how do you kind of get your solution in there? How do you customize it? How do you tailor it for the particular customer? And now you can actually get in there and like these code generation systems can help you with a lot of that.
Correct. That's right. That's right. And remember, the other thing that is also going on that's true for all of us is that it is a reasonable bet, again, that the music will stop at some point for model improvements.
Yeah.
Okay, we don't know when, but it will. You just want to make sure that you're next to a chair when that stops. That's part of the reason for building up businesses quickly.
Yeah, for sure. You started touching upon this, Sridhar, which is what are businesses that will have enduring value after kind of like, software feels as though it is not commoditized, but certainly faster to build and cheaper to build. Ad marketplaces are kind of one example. What are some other categories that you're kind of bullish on? Maybe not bearish on. Not bearish on.
Yeah. I mean, I think things that interact with external worlds. We talked about like ad ecosystems, which are a kind of marketplace, but I think other marketplaces, whether it's an Airbnb or an Uber, or any other kind of specialized marketplace even, I think they have clearly reliable, enduring value. I don't particularly think that infrastructure as a category, and I think you would agree, Aditya, that there's anything special about it. It used to be that people are like, oh, SaaS software is easier to rebuild and replace than infrastructure software. I don't really think agents care. For example, with something like a Spark or even a file system implementation, if you have a reference implementation, you can build a new implementation that's compatible API by API with what's already out there. Yeah, I don't know much beyond that in terms of what has long-term enduring value. It has to be something beyond just software.
One of the things I was struck by, Sridhar, in our conversation before this was just your willingness to learn, like your desire to wake up. And particularly right now, it's just an incredible moment that every single day, like the pace of change means that if you enjoy learning, it's a little bit overwhelming, but it's awesome, right? You wake up every day, there's something new, and it's easy to be both overwhelmed, but also kind of like giddy with the progress. But what is your information regimen? How do you keep up to are you a Twitter guy? Do you read more Substacks? Do you like to talk to people, the smartest people that how do you get alpha in terms of like information that you ingest and then digest?
I mean, first of all, I think this is also a time where if you have a day job, especially like I do, you better be ready to put infinite amounts of time. Yeah. The people that I see routinely have no clue about what is going on in the world of AI around them are the ones that I was saying this when we were chatting and Ruchi laughed, which is like, if you have an 8 to 5 calendar and have a life, AI is not for you. You'll never learn anything anyway. It's first of all, it just requires a lot of time. I talk to a lot of people, both one-on-one, but also on Slack. I have direct connections with a lot of our most progressive engineers at Snowflake, and we are constantly going back and forth about, hey, look at this, or look at what is possible. I spend a lot of time tinkering with things hands-on. At sort of various levels, yes, writing code, but even figuring out new ways of doing things. Yeah. It only took a little bit of tinkering to figure out that Coco or Coding Agent mostly runs on Opus, but I wanted to generate an XKCD deck. I was like, okay, you just need an OpenAI API to generate like really good cartoons. And out of that came a deck to teach people at Snowflake how to better use agents to write software. And so just keeping your mind open about what is possible. Yeah. I think it's exhausting, but it's also, I've had more fun at work in the last 6 months than probably the previous 15, 20 years put together. It's just an amazing time to be alive.
Yesterday was Father's Day. I have 3 young children. So Ruchi decided to interview my children with a couple of questions. And one of the questions was, what does your dad like to do? So one of them is like, my dad seems to be reading all the time. The other one is like, my dad likes to work. And there was a part of me, I was like, they think of me as a guy who reads and works. And then I was like, but right now is the time to do it. Because like we're just living in these times where you kind of need to put it in. But it was kind of an interesting moment because it's hard to have the 8 to 5. And then because I think we are just living in super accelerated times right now. Where you have to make some sacrifices. What is a book that most changed your trajectory?
You asked me this. I don't have a good answer.
Fair.
I'll give you a geek answer.
Ooh.
I think it was a trigonometry book my high school teacher gave me. Ooh. I spent an entire summer solving all the problems in it. I'm ashamed to admit it, but...
Oh, that's a great answer. I mean, now I kind of want to know the book. Okay. This is a good one, actually. A belief about search that you held strongly that turned out to be wrong.
People cared, I think there's more about privacy, definitely about search, that people cared enough about things like the utility or the intrusiveness of ads to want them to actually do something.
You're saying that most people don't care.
Yeah. Don't care. I think convenience, accessibility trumped irritation.
Completely agree.
This is also what people say is not what they mean.
Correct. Yeah.
It's relying on any kind of interview, surveys, etc., tells you nothing. There are a class of problems that you should not ask people about. You should see what they do instead.
It's like stated preferences versus revealed preferences. Absolutely. The thing that Google got right that most people, I think, still don't really quite grok or still misunderstand.
Look, they accidentally landed in the most amazing, diamond mine in history. But I think Google got ad-driven monetization, especially in the context of search, that most people don't give it enough credit for. Yeah, I think we used to have early principles that did things like split value between our users and Google itself. There's a 50-50 split rule. If you came up with a great new way to optimize ad revenue, Eric would always tell us you should devote 50% of that to improving the quality of the advertising system, and 50% Google would take as revenue. In a weird, ironic way, I was one of the witnesses in the DOJ trial, and so I got to see. This can often be a cringeworthy experience, but it wasn't, thankfully. I saw emails that I had written for 15 years, and the replies. And what struck out was just the incredible thoughtfulness that went into monetization and how we approached it. The ferocious competitive nature, yes, that's also a part of them and me, but that ability to have a really high standard, I think is pretty remarkable. And I can assure you, you can look at ads served by pretty much any other major players, and they're all wildly more cringeworthy than what Google does even today.
I want to say we're out of time. I'm going to get Sridhar out of here by 5. Thank you for being so candid with your thoughts. I think we live in such interesting times that, you coming in and sharing your story, I think is very, very helpful. So thank you.
Thank you so much.